The bell above the shop door had not rung in days, and the silence inside felt heavier than the dust settled on the wooden shelves. Glass jars lined the walls, once full of flour, beans, and sugar, now nearly empty. Behind the counter stood a woman who had not planned to be brave that morning, only desperate enough to survive it. Her name no longer mattered to the town the way it once had. She was known now only as the widow with the long red braid, the one who kept her eyes lowered and her grief neatly folded inside her shawl. Her hair fell down her back like a memory she could not escape, thick and carefully woven, the last thing her husband had ever complimented before he rode out and never returned. She had washed it that morning, brushed it slowly, and braided it with trembling fingers, knowing exactly what she had come to do. Hunger had a way of stripping pride faster than any blade. She had not eaten properly in 3 days, and the small life growing inside her made the ache sharper, louder, impossible to ignore. She stepped closer to the counter, her hands resting on the worn wood as if it might steady her. The shopkeeper, a thin man with tired eyes, looked up with practiced indifference. He had seen desperation before. It passed through town like dust storms, leaving nothing but silence in its wake. "I don't have money," she said softly, her voice barely more than a breath. "But I can trade." The shopkeeper's eyes drifted, not to her face, but to her braid. Long hair had value on the frontier. Wigs, extensions, things for women who could afford vanity. He hesitated only a moment before nodding toward the loaf of bread behind him. "1 braid," he said flatly. "That'll get you bread, nothing more." Her fingers tightened around the edge of the counter. A single nod escaped her, though her chest felt like it might crack open. She reached up slowly, as if asking her body for permission, and began to loosen the braid she had worn since girlhood. That was when the door opened. The bell rang once, sharp and sudden, slicing through the stillness. Dust swirled in the sunlight as a man stepped inside, tall, broad-shouldered, carrying the quiet weight of someone who had seen too much road. His hat shadowed his eyes, but not enough to hide the way they immediately fixed on the scene before him. He took it in without a word. The empty shelves, the loaf of bread, the woman with her hair half unraveled and her dignity hanging by a thread. "Stop," he said. His voice was calm, but it carried the kind of authority that made men listen before they realized why. The shopkeeper froze, hand hovering near the loaf. The woman's fingers stilled in her hair. The man stepped closer to the counter, removing his gloves slowly, deliberately. He laid a small stack of coins on the wood, the sound of metal ringing louder than the bell had moments before. "She keeps her hair," he said. "I'll pay." The shopkeeper blinked, then swept the coins toward himself with greedy relief. "Bread and more?" he asked. "Bread," the man replied. Then, after a pause, "and whatever else she needs." The woman turned to look at him for the first time. Up close, she could see the lines of exhaustion etched into his face, the roughness of his hands, the steadiness of his gaze. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't performing kindness. He was simply doing it. "I didn't ask for," she began. "I know," he said gently. "But you needed it." The shopkeeper wrapped the bread and set it on the counter along with a small sack of flour. The woman reached for it, her hands shaking, unsure whether gratitude or shame burned stronger in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. The man nodded once, already turning toward the door. "Take care of yourself," he said. Then, almost as an afterthought, "both of you." Her breath caught. She had not told him. No one noticed these things unless they were looking carefully. And somehow, he had. Outside, the sun felt warmer than it had all morning. She clutched the bread to her chest as if it might vanish if she loosened her grip. She watched the man walk toward his horse, every step unhurried, unburdened by the moment he had just changed. "Wait," she called. He turned. "I don't know your name." "You don't need it," he replied. "But I want it." A corner of his mouth lifted. "They call me Eli. I'm—" She stopped herself, swallowing. Names felt fragile these days. "Thank you, Eli." He tipped his hat and mounted his horse, riding out of town as quietly as he had entered it. She did not expect to see him again. But the frontier had a way of folding lives together whether they asked for it or not. Days passed, then weeks. The bread did not last long, but the memory of that kindness lingered like warmth on cold nights. She found small work where she could, mending clothes, washing dishes, surviving on patience and stubbornness more than food. Her belly grew rounder. Her body grew heavier. The town's whispers grew louder. Then one evening, as the sun bled red into the horizon, a knock came at her door. She opened it to find Eli standing there, hat in hand, eyes uncertain for the first time. "I was passing through," he said. "Thought I'd check if you were all right." She should have said yes. She should have lied. Instead, she stepped aside and let him see the truth. The nearly empty room, the thin blanket, the exhaustion she could no longer hide. He did not comment. He never did. He simply rolled up his sleeves. That night, he fixed the loose shutter, brought in firewood, and left a sack of supplies on the table without ceremony. When he turned to leave, she surprised herself by asking him to stay. Not forever, not even long, just for supper. He stayed. One meal became another became a habit. He never crossed a line she did not invite him to. He never looked at her like she owed him anything. When the baby came early on a storm-soaked night, he was there, holding a lantern with shaking hands, whispering encouragement he didn't know he possessed. He named the child nothing. That choice was hers. But when the baby wrapped tiny fingers around his own, something inside him broke open and refused to close again. Town gossip turned cruel. People whispered about charity and shame, about debts unpaid and kindness misunderstood. Eli heard every word and ignored them all. She tried to trade her hair for bread, one man scoffed in the saloon. And now she's trading something else. Eli stood slowly, his chair scraping against the floor. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten. He simply said, "Say that again." No one did. Winter came hard that year. Snow buried the roads, and hunger followed close behind. Eli took work wherever it existed, riding out before dawn and returning after dark. He brought home food, firewood, small carved toys for the baby. He never once called the house his own, but he guarded it like it was. One night, as the fire crackled low, she finally spoke the words she had been holding back. "Why?" she asked. "Why help me?" Eli stared into the flames for a long moment. "Because once," he said, "I walked past someone who needed me. And I never forgave myself for it." She reached for his hand then, not in gratitude, not in desperation, but in understanding. Spring softened the land. The baby learned to laugh. The widow learned how to breathe again. And Eli learned that sometimes, the things we think we are rescuing are the very things that save us. The town never apologized. They simply adjusted, as towns do, rewriting the story until it sounded kinder. They spoke of love as if it had always been obvious, as if sacrifice had never been necessary. But she remembered the morning she nearly gave up the last piece of herself for a loaf of bread. She remembered the man who stopped her, not with pity, but with dignity. Years later, when her hair was streaked with silver and her child grown strong, she would sit by the window and braid her hair slowly, carefully, knowing exactly what it was worth. Not bread, but a life.